We are live, I believe. First of all, online, can people hear me? Alan, can you hear us okay? Brilliant. Okay. So welcome everybody to the Centre for World Cinemas and Digital Cultures, to this launch event for a double edition of Academic Quarterly. The growth in film practice in areas of kind of film studies that haven't traditionally done it has just been kind of going through the roof recently. And it's certainly something that we've really embraced, I think, in the Centre for World Cinemas and Digital Cultures. I suppose if we're going to talk about starting point, what's the starting point? Let's pick the starting point. Alan O'Leary's groundbreaking videographic work. It was lovely to have Alan with us, and he really sort of like drove us in this direction, really. And it's great to see his work go from strength to strength, and to have him with us today from Denmark. It's certainly something that's kind of basically changed everything for me in terms of the way that I deal with research. My kind of focus is very much now on film practice, and particularly on the relationship between participatory film methodologies and activism. So that's really great. And you know, obviously loads of us really have. I think it's something that we've really kind of like embraced with gusto in the centre. So it's lovely to be able to host this launch event for these this double edition. It's also really nice to be able to do this at this moment, because we've come to a very interesting moment in our journey with film practice and sort of the relationship between film practice, academic film studies, with Libby's appointment. So Libby's our first lecturer of videographic criticism, so it's fantastic to be able to also welcome Libby to the centre, and also the fact that Libby was a key figure in putting this collection together. So it's really lovely to be able to host Libby, to have Libby here, and also Katie Grant, an old friend of the centre. So lovely to have you with us, Katie, and it's really great to see us working you very hard, having you involved in this particular event, and also the next event, which is being hosted by Melanie Bell, who Melanie's at the back of the room there. So I think without further ado, I know that, so the next thing is that Alan's going to show the film, but if I could first of all pass on to Libby, who's going to kind of get this show properly on the road. So thank you very much, Libby.
Thank you. Thank you, Paul, so much for the introduction. Thank you, everyone, for being here today. So many exciting things to do on campus every day, so it means a lot that everyone's taking their time to join us. And thank you again to Catherine, to Katie Grant for coming to the University of Leeds, coming back to her university as an alum of this university. So this is a very exciting event, and thank you all for being here. So right now I'm going to pass the microphone to Alan O'Leary, who is one of the co-editors of the double issue that we're presenting today, an associate professor of film and media at Aarhus University. So Alan, I think you'll kick us off too, and then show the clip reel in which we'll show you a little bit of the articles and video essays that have been published in the double issue that we are presenting today. Thank you again.
Thank you, Libby, and thank you, Paul. And as Paul mentioned, I'm an exile from the University of Leeds, so it's nice to be able to present back, even virtually, back to my old university of 15 years, I think it was there. I'll just share my screen, so let me know if you don't see this. So what I'd like to do is just very briefly introduce, as Libby says, the special issues, and perhaps give a couple of thanks. I'll just say that we initially started off by planning to do one special issue devoted to this theme of academic filmmaking. And the goal was, as it says there, to interrogate a shared medium and our common or diverging processes and methods. So whatever kind of academic filmmaking we might be doing, in other words, and in whatever discipline. This special issue aims, this was from the call for papers, I should say, or the call for submissions, to debate the particular affordances of filmmaking as means and medium of investigation and communication, and in general, to offer the scholarly evaluation of the different modes and approaches to academic filmmaking. Now, I'll just say that we had such an enormous response that we ended up making it into two special issues. The first, AQ, Academic Quarter 27, has 11 articles in it about academic filmmaking, while the second has 10 video submissions, 2 of which actually contain multiple videos along with their guiding statements. So it ended up, in other words, being 2 special issues. And I won't say more about the contents now, because you'll see in a moment a quote and clip reel that will summarize or give you a snippet or some extracts of the contents. I will, however, say thank you to the senior editors and the editorial assistants at Academic Quarter, which is a journal published at the University of Aalborg here in Denmark. I especially mention Kim Toft Hansen, who was our close collaborator, and also Annemette Heliso, who was the editorial assistant who helped us with the production of the issues. I'll also say thank you very much to the peer reviewers, because we had an extraordinary number working on a lot of submissions. And as all the academics in the room are aware, peer reviewing has become increasingly arduous, and lots of people like to say, or like to resist becoming peer reviewers now, or acting as peer reviewers, simply because of the labor in the academy, the weight of labor in the academy as a whole. So thank you very much to those peer reviewers who must remain anonymous, but we're very grateful to them. We'll also say thank you, of course, to the contributors who worked so hard to make such interesting work, whether in the form of prose or in the form of video. And finally, thanks to Paul Cooke, Professor Paul Cooke, my old colleague at Leeds, and to the Centre for World Cinemas and Digital Cultures, and indeed to Libby, who's newly employed there at Leeds, for hosting this launch event. What I'll do now is I'll give a new share and show you the clip reel, which lasts about 11 minutes, with quotations from the articles and extracts, clips from the videos that are in the second of the 2 special issues.
In Kiarostami's film Certified Copy, the use of accent plays an important role in exploring the themes of identity.
Listen to this.
I may be ambitious, but it's also completely pointless.
Hey.
Ow.
Bon, je peux vous montrer.
World of reality, the practice of rehearsing.
One's own language is never just the right one.
I actually don't think it's necessary to show much footage from the film.
If you pretend something long enough.
Let's stop here for a second. What is this? Why this accent?
Buy it, use it, break it, fix it, trash it, change it, mail, upgrade it, charge it, point it, zoom it, press it, snap it, work it, quick erase it, write it, cut it, paste it, save it, load it, check it, quick rewrite it, plug it, play it, burn it, rip it, drag it, drop it, zip unzip it, lock it, fill it, call it, find it, view it, code it, jump and lock it, surf it, scroll it, pose it, click it, cross it, crack it, switch, update it, name it, read it, tune it, print it, scan it, send it, fax, rename it, touch it, bring it, pay it, watch it, turn it, leave it, start, format it, buy it, use it, break it, fix it, trash it, change it, mail, upgrade it, charge it, point it, zoom it, press it, snap it, work it, quick erase it, write it, cut it, paste it, save it, load it, check it, quick rewrite it, plug it, play it, burn it, rip it, drag it, drop it, zip unzip it, lock it.
What are we here?
How do we define ourselves? Researchers, scholars, practitioners. Yes, some of that. Are we also artists, essayists, documentarians?
It is really breaking down the ideas that we have in Western thought about the difference between nature and culture. How much does that shape the way we think and understand the world, and how much can we assume that shapes other people's way of thinking?
So that's really interesting. You're talking about ontology then as an opportunity to think about difference. Whereas in Bazin, ontology seems to have this sense of an essence of something that's caught in a photograph that can then be transmitted, a sort of like a transcendent moment implicit within the photograph that is always there.
But then Bazin is really focusing on the object of the photograph itself, whereas anthropology focuses on the people around it.
Take 1. Take 3. Shit. Take 6. Eesh. 5 seconds. Fudge. Okay. 8:53 p.m. So apparently all the previous takes were not recorded, which is great. Okay, that was close. 9 p.m. Take 14. Okay. That was worse. Take 19. Nope.
Te convertirás en una mujer fuerte y segura de sí misma. Veo que solucionarás las cosas que están mal, transformándote en la mujer que siempre quisiste ser. Saldrás adelante, disfrutarás con tus amigos y serás una mujer guerrera, que siempre intentará ayudar a los demás con los conocimientos que has adquirido sobre tu cuerpo y mente. Ayudarás a tus amigas a vivir felices y libres con su cuerpo. Vivirás tranquila y plena. Saldrás a dar largas caminatas por el bosque y te conectarás más con tu espíritu natural. Expresarás tus emociones e ideales con pinturas y dibujos, y estas influirán en las personas que las vean y propagarás tu mensaje de igualdad y amor para todas.
So what my feeling was that maybe we were crossing a little bit the boundary, but then we had an interesting discussion, I think, about whether being too cautious would actually lead to no product at all. And I think that might be the case.
Just one minute.
The potential of the video essay lies in a reconciliation of these methods, poetic deconstruction, critical remixing, all to the end of sensual occupation. If a battle is to be waged in videographic criticism, it may be between these tentpoles, image as possession, citation, regurgitation, sifted for evidence, and image as a visit to the temple of vision, a replenishing of the great well. There is no uniform goal to object-based criticism, but to lodge a response to the object.
So in the introduction to the issues, we do sort of attempt to define academic filmmaking. And the definition that we give many, many examples of academic filmmaking over the years, including previous to the digital age. But the definition that we give is, because of the diversity of its practices and origins, any definition of academic filmmaking can only be a tautology. Academic filmmaking simply refers to film and video made by academics or filmmaking practices undertaken by them. But I was interested to see if throughout the articles that we received and published in the issues, if other definitions for academic filmmaking also came from the contributors. And I'll share some quotes from the authors and also some images of types of films that our contributors mentioned and wrote about in their essays and in their articles. So Eylem Atakov, a documentary filmmaker and scholar, writes, "Documentary filmmaking in academia can be an efficient strategy for scholar activism. I use filmmaking to mobilize academic research." And there were many articles dedicated to the documentary film practice as a practice of academic filmmaking and its potentials for activism and for mobilizing research and researchers and students as well. And so there are some examples of these kinds of works, including Left Behind from 2023, directed by Eylem Atakov and Caroline Pelikan, as well as Ruthless Times, Songs of Care, directed by Susanna Helke, a documentary from Finland from 2022. Dream Workers, a film from 2022 by Pinar Fontina, one of the authors. In the journal, a film about a women's theater group from Turkey. And so many examples of works similar to these, right? Documentaries that are made in communities or about communities and that have a social purpose and an activist potential. And then we have also this comment from Jessica Jacobs that I wanted to highlight, where she writes, a positivist approach that to produce knowledge as truth, academic film should be documentaries, still lingers. By accepting any format or genre of film, we are encouraging filmmakers to think beyond the idea of film as document. So there was also a suggestion in these texts that perhaps academic filmmaking was not only limited to documentary filmmaking, but could also expand into other film genres and formats. And so in Jessica, and there's some other films like By Bike She Lives from 2020 that was mentioned, that was presented by Jessica Jacobs in her article with about a series of 3 parodic shorts that were made through a workshop in Brussels. And there were many films included in the issue that our authors wrote about that were made in the context of workshops and universities. And so that was also something that we saw repeat throughout the issues. And I would also like to emphasize or to mention again this film Sour Lake, directed by Andres Davila from 2019, which is also a documentary film, but I would say an experimental and ethnographic documentary. So we see academic filmmaking extending also to other genres and other types of filmmaking. And highlight this quote from Sebastián Wiedemann and Verónica Naranjo Quintero, who write that we aim to affirm academic filmmaking as a proprietary space for the consolidation of a material thought that relocates the body to the center of its motivations and movements. Academic filmmaking as a gesture of social justice, as well as a way of revitalizing and decolonizing the university. So again, we return to this idea of academic filmmaking as it relates to activism and social justice, but through this also potentially decolonizing lens. And there we published the video essay, Present Bodies, Emancipated Voices, or How to Relocate Bodies in Thought by these authors, which is also a very different type of video essay and a form of videographic and academic filmmaking. The other types of films and works that were obviously mentioned a lot and throughout the 2 issues are video essays and forms of videographic criticism, right? And we have many authors who wrote about the state of the video essay today and also where it might go in the future. And so Kevin B. Lee and Silvia Cipolletti wrote that over the past decade, the video essay has proven itself to be a vital component of film scholarship in the digital era, as it combines the twin disciplines of academia and filmmaking into a potent and multifaceted practice for research, scholarship, publishing, and pedagogy. So we do have the sense throughout the 2 issues that perhaps it's no longer necessary to have to justify or claim that videographic criticism or the practice of making video essays is an academic practice. The issues do show that we've reached a moment where this is, there's so much time has gone by, so much work has been put into this practice that it's now able to stand on its own in academia. And there are many video essays mentioned, and I'm saying not only video essays that are published in the second of the double issues, but I'm speaking also about articles that are writing about videographic work, right? So the video essay, some video essays mentioned in these articles include Imagining Orphe by Jenny Oyalan Kolaski, Fated to be Mated by Catherine Grant, Speculative Queer Autoethnography by Dana McLeod, Spencer Bell, Nobody Knows My Name by Liz Green, and many, many other video essays included in the issue. Again, there is a reflection about where academic filmmaking is today. And Susan Kerrigan, Bettina Frankham, and James Vernon write that filmmaking in the academy has matured. The opportunity to present filmic outputs and screen works produced through practice-based research has been nurtured for 40 years. Practice-based methods of research have contributed to a vibrant community of filmmaking researchers qualified within their disciplinary norms to conduct research in a way that allows it to be understood as making a recognizable contribution to knowledge within the fields of cultural production from which it emerged. And Johannes Binotto, also a scholar and video essayist, reflects that the scholarly practice of video essay is a practice that does not claim complete control, but which is opened up to disruptions, deformations, and contingencies, seeing them not as mere accidents, but as critical encounters and forms of thought. Connected to this idea of the personal and the embodied experience, we also have author Samantha Close reflect more on the affective qualities made possible by academic filmmaking or in expressions of this. So critical argument, she writes, can be generative in much the same way as art can be, inspiring different correct interpretations and new arguments. Academic filmmaking enhances this property by incorporating effective tools and texts, such as vivid footage or popular music, that move us emotionally at the same time as they can form part of a critical argument. Scholarly methodology is simultaneously deeply personal and effective, and to at least the same degree integrated with technological infrastructures. So there is an emphasis on the personal and the effective coming through in videographic criticism and in academic filmmaking. And one of the examples is also from the video essay that we published in volume 28, towards an ecology of practices in academic filmmaking, speaking nearby Ana Vaz, Javiera Cisterna, and Sofia Galiza, by Laura Davila Argotti and Valentina Giraldo, and a video essay that very clearly shows this possibility for a more effective way of doing videographic criticism. And finally, I wanted to share also on one of the articles I co-wrote with two of my former colleagues and also friends from the Universidad de las Artes in Ecuador, in which we talk about 3 case studies, basically 3 films that each of us made while we were teaching at the university and working as researchers. And in my case, I won't get into the film that I made exactly, although it is an example, I think, of videographic criticism and of the video essay, but also its connection with the essay film, and this kind of in-between space. But I do want to share that while writing this article with the co-authors Andres Davila and Carlos Terán Vargas, we discovered that the films that we were making in the academic space were films that in our context at the time we were all living and working in Ecuador there were films that it would have been very difficult to have made these films in any other way. They were films that because of their experimental nature, because they did not follow exactly the conventions of pre-production, production, and post-production, because we did not have a producer, because these were films really coming from our research questions, and developed over like a different type of timeline than the one that is usually assumed in film, more industrial film production. They were films that would have never received the support of like the National Film Fund, for example, in Ecuador. So we realized that writing the article that really our work, this work and the work that we were doing really was possible in the academic context. And I think that also speaks to how this question of what is academic filmmaking could also vary depending on where we're speaking from, where we are positioning ourselves and who we're making films for as well. And just to conclude, leaving you with this idea from Barbara Zecki's article. She writes, "It is worth asking whether the video essay will lose its accent as videographic criticism solidifies its place as a recognized academic field. Personally, I don't think it will. On the contrary, I believe that greater academic recognition will allow more freedom for the video essay to fully embrace its accent, and ultimately for the video essayist to become video essay." I would like to end with this question of also the future of these practices. And I think that as we can see from these issues that, as Alan mentioned, we had so many submissions, we really intended to just do one issue and it became 2. So we see that this is something that's growing, that people are thinking about it from many different parts of the world and in different languages and different accents, but also in a way of how this can disrupt, I think, not only and make us think, question, or just maybe expand how we consider academic or scholarly work, but also perhaps what is thought of like traditional filmmaking as well. So thank you. And I will now hand it over to Katie. Oh, no, sorry, to Alan. I made a mistake. So now Alan will speak about writing and / about academic filmmaking.
The question I'd like to ask in my short presentation is, just a moment, see if I get this to work. Hope you can see the shared screen there. What do scholars write about when they write about academic filmmaking? And I'll also gesture towards the question of why academic filmmakers might write about their academic filmmaking. What's the function of such writing for the makers? To answer these questions, I'm going to look at our two co-edited special issues of Academic Quarter, and there'll be a certain amount of overlap, obviously, with what Libby has just been saying. And just to remind you, one of the two issues, number 27, contains 11 articles about academic filmmaking, as Libby has just shown, of various sorts, including a lot of material about documentary, but others too, other sorts of modes, while the other second special issue actually contains academic filmmaking, at least in its video essay mode, with 10 video submissions, some of which are actually multiple videos, and their accompanying guiding statements. Considering then the first of the two special issues, we find that the themes and approaches of the 11 prose articles fall into 5 overlapping categories. As you can see there, a couple of people discuss their own filmmaking work as a kind of case study that leads to, the study of other issues. In one case, we have a filmmaker herself, Lizzie Thin, talking about another's work as a case study. We have a bunch of articles that discuss a range of work, whether by themselves and others, or just others, to develop a theoretical analysis or to inductively generalize about the practice or about a practice of academic filmmaking. Several of the articles also, as we might expect, deal with institutional contexts and the requirements of institutions in relation to academic filmmaking. Relatedly, several deal with publication, and a couple also, including Libby's one that you just mentioned, deal with teaching. So as Libby was just saying, the 11 articles cover a variety of filmmaking practices. I've just put a few of them on the slide there, but these themes and approaches cut across the account of the different practices. For example, and I'll just show you, oh, by the way, I should say I put this presentation in the chat because I realized some of this material might be a little bit illegible online, but you can download it in PDF form from the chat for those who are online. In any case, you can see here, for example, that articles dealing with experimental filmmaking and industrial film practices as research, both of these also deal with institutional contexts, for example, and you can see that several different articles dealing with several different modes deal with publication and so on. As I said, this material is available online for those who are attending online. Now, the quote and the clip reel that you saw earlier finished with an extract from one of these articles from Academic Quarter 27 by Kerrigan, Franken, and Verdon, and it's an article concerned, as you can see there, with the articulation of creative practice research, in their case, in the Australian context. The three authors write that there remains a need to explicate filmmaking research through the written word. The research statement, or often called the guiding statement or the academic research statement, or indeed the creator statement, in order to make research contained within a film or screen work evident to all. Now, I should say that I considered adding a question mark to that statement, because not all academic filmmakers would agree that there remains a need to explicate filmmaking research through the written word, though I think all would recognize that there's often an institutional imperative to do so. But there are some academic filmmakers who feel that explication through the written word is a kind of trespassing on a distinct mode of audiovisual thought and investigation. Others again argue that for academic filmmaking, and perhaps especially for the video essay, to attain epistemic and scholarly dignity, it should aspire to some kind of autonomy from the written word. So you shouldn't need the creator statement to say what you're up to. But as I'm going to suggest, academic filmmakers, at least in the context of our two special issues, often seem very eager to explicate the theoretical, the political, or the other contexts of their work. In any case, the videos in the second special issue, Academic Quarter 28, don't appear alone. Each video or batch of videos is accompanied by a creator statement or what we call a guiding text. Well, it wasn't our term, actually. It comes from the journal itself, Academic Quarter. The provision of a supporting statement, of course, as you all well know, is modeled after standard procedure for the articulation of research questions and methods in university-based practice research projects. And this is described in the article already mentioned by Kerrigan, Frankham, and Burden. I want to note a difference, though, from another account found in the same special issue, and this is the article by Ben Spatz. Ben, as many of you will know, is the founding editor of the Journal of Embodied Research, and they note in their article that the Journal of Embodied Research does not publish any written material apart from what appears, whether spoken or written, in the video. So this spoken or textual material in the video is provided in transcript in appendix to the video, but the Journal of Embodied Research requires and provides no creator statement or academic guiding text. The video exists on its own in that sense. So I think we shouldn't take it as universally accepted practice that a written statement is required to demonstrate the status as research and scholarship of a given artifact of academic filmmaking. But still, I think we, the special issue editors, and excuse me if I speak for Libby and Katie here, but I think we'd want to challenge an assumption that's sometimes expressed that the provision of a written statement in some way weakens a video or somehow dilutes its scholarly authority, or at least perhaps even its aesthetic authority. In our introduction to the special issues, we write, as you can see on the slide there, that there is no assumption in these special issues that the video essays are to be considered as autonomous objects. The content of the scholarship is to be grasped in a dialogue of video and accompanying prose text. Now, as many of you know, this feature of a kind of dialogue between video and text is even more pronounced in the context of video publication in venues like Screenworks, the UK-based journal, or In Transition, which many of you will be familiar with, the journal of, well, I've forgotten what the subtitle of it is, but in any case, typically of videographic criticism, so video essays about screen and media. In these two venues anyway, typically 2 peer reviews are published along with the video and the creator statement. So the active scholarship in such a context happens in the encounter between modes, so multimodal text and then prose text, and the encounter even between multiple authors. This is especially true in the case of In Transition, where the peer reviewers are named, and this is described in Drew Morton and Kevin Ferguson's article in AQ 27, A Decade of In Transition. But to return to the question of what video essayists focus on in their creator statements, or in this case, what we call the guiding statement, the work in Academic Quarter 28 confirms the analysis performed by Ian Garwood of 104 creator statements published alongside the videos in Transition. So he had surveyed the journal up to the date of publication of his article in 2020. Ian Garwood finds 3 topics that appear in some measure in most, or at least some or all of these accompanying statements. He says most of them, or a significant number, write on the content and critical context. So they offer summaries of the content of a video and reviews of critical writing that relate to the topic being addressed in the video, as we might expect, I suppose, but it's not to be taken for granted. A second theme is writing on the production context and on the process. So it offers these creator statements typically attend to the circumstances that saw the video come into being and reflect on the choices made during the production process. And thirdly, they reflect on the video essay itself as a scholarly form. They directly tackle the issue of what makes their videos scholarly, or rather, either through attention to formal techniques used in the video itself, or by considering the video essay as such as a scholarly form. So ours, the video essays, creator statements, or academic guiding statements in the in AQ28 also conform to this analysis that Garwood has made. Ian doesn't discuss the length of the creator statements that he analyzes from In Transition, though I note that the journal officially asks for a 300 to 1,000 word supporting statement. Although I'd have to say in practice, these can sometimes be rather longer. I definitely think the ones that I provided over the years to In Transition were longer. But following the academic quarter submission guidelines, and I should say that these guidelines by this Danish journal partly reflect a nervousness about the institutional status of video essays in the Danish context, where they've been officially accepted, but perhaps unofficially are still viewed with a certain amount of skepticism. But in any case, Academic Quarter asked us to ask for a longer guiding text of between 1,000 to 1,500 words versus the 300 to 1,000 of In Transition. Now, the point I want to make is that fully half of the submissions in Academic Quarter 28, the second of the special issues, actually overshoot this word limit. They overshoot it by 200 words rather, because that's what we were allowed to offer as a maximum in negotiation with the senior journal editors. Several of the academic guiding statements originally came in much, much longer than that, and sometimes double that length. And I note that only one submission was close to the lower allowed limit of 1,000 words. So my question is why? Why did contributors feel the need to write so much, or feel the desire to write so much? I don't have an answer to that question necessarily. I'd like to invite you to consider the question. I mean, I can think of various possible answers, but my favorite possible answer is suggested by a quotation from Jean-François Lyotard, used by Ella Wright in her video and discussed in her guiding statement in one of the pieces from Academic Quarter 28. She quotes Lyotard as saying that the philosopher is someone who speaks in order to find the rule of what she or he wishes to say, or they wish to say. The philosopher is someone who speaks before knowing the rule and without knowing it. So Ella comments, what does this mean, or what's the application or relevance of this to our context? Well, she comments on this quotation in her guiding statement. Fundamentally, she says the creative practitioner or the academic filmmaker must create and live in the space of finding, of not knowing, the space of not knowing. I think this is lovely. I think that, I want to point out that space of finding, of not knowing, is a space highly charged with reflection for academic filmmakers. And perhaps academic filmmakers write not primarily in order to report on or to justify their practice in institutional terms. Perhaps they write in order themselves to come to know that practice better. And I like to think that the writing about academic filmmaking found in our 2 issues of Academic Quarter communicates a sense of the excitement and dynamism of an academic practice, academic filmmaking, that operates precisely in a space of uncertainty and investigation. And thank you. I'll stop there.
And it is very weird being back in this room, because I was a student at Leeds, undergraduate and postgraduate, for most of the 1980s, including in this room, and I sat over there. So it's very, very weird being back indeed. Okay, so I am going to talk a little bit about, we were all we were just choosing what was most compelling to us as we reflect on the work that we did for much of the last 2 years, really, until these issues were published. And as a result, it does overlap a little. So I'm going to try and avoid big overlaps, but just kind of, in a way, reiterate some things and maybe say a few other things. But I'm also speaking maybe a bit more personally. I'm trying to represent the issues a bit less than Alan and Libby did. I'm kind of just thinking a bit more about what drew me in here. But there is a kind of a little bit of coverage I'm going to try and do, though. So I was thinking about this question of new knowledge. So new knowledge is this phrase that crops up a bit, especially in relation to different forms of research, of which Academic filmmaking might be one, creative practice research forms, including writing, creative writing, for example, maybe another one, art in the academy, painting, all of the different kind of creative pursuits that might be pursued in academia these days, often have anxious discussions staged around them. You could say that's sort of what we're doing as well. Maybe we're not so anxious about it. But this question of, does this creative stuff produce knowledge? You know, like that seems to be quite an important question. Alan and I in particular, and I think probably Libby too, haven't spoken at length to Libby about this, but have with Alan, are pretty suspicious about this. So that's where the scare quotes around new knowledge come. I don't think that the instrumentality of producing facts and figures is really what we should be engaged in doing. I think we should be pursuing our research as people based in universities, as scholars, using the methods that we deem to be appropriate, based on our training and our leanings and our interests. When we produce work in academia, we are audited for it, especially in the UK, and the kind of gold standard is often articulated in 3 words: originality, significance, and rigor. Rigor means doing what you're doing well in a way that would be regarded as thorough, paying attention to all of the things you ought to pay attention to. Significance just means you don't pick such a tiny, tiny thing that nobody cares about it, especially if you're funded to do your research. You need to make your research something that matters. It doesn't have to be massively mattering, like the future of the planet, for example, although no, please research that. It could be something much, much smaller, but it shouldn't be completely insignificant. And then to come back to the first and probably the most important thing that we're audited on, and we ourselves self-audit on perhaps, is originality. And that's, if you like, another way of saying new knowledge. Are we saying something, doing something, making something that hasn't been made before, something significant, and making, doing, and saying it in a rigorous way? Okay, so yeah, I think in a way, think about it today, I was also drawn to saying, well, what's different about the academic context here? Because people have been making films, obviously, outside of academia, but in other forms of educational institutions, so not the university, but art schools, for like millennia, well, probably millennia. I mean, literally, painting schools, sculpture schools are educational sites that have been around for millennia. But what is different about the university, especially the university of today, the university of the new humanities that Alan was talking, that we put into our title of these 2 issues? What does new knowledge really mean here in this context? And for me, the specificity of the university, and this really is a personal view, is that here we are trained to build on mastery. We do our undergraduate degrees in a subject, we learn the basics, we learn the received knowledge, the established knowledge. If it involves training in something, we do that basic training in something. Then if we like, we go on, if we're lucky and get money to do so, we do master's degrees in order to finalize our mastery of that received knowledge, the existing knowledge. Moving on finally to doctoral degrees and beyond, where we are expected to produce new knowledge, to be original, to use our mastery to understand what we are saying is new. How can we know if it's new unless we have mastered what is old? What is the place of academic filmmaking in this? And what are our authors? What do we as editors think about that? So that's kind of where I'm going with the rest of this. As Aylem Attakab writes in her discussion of her documentary practice that both Alan and Libby have referred to already, she writes, conducting any academic research starts with identifying a gap in existing knowledge and formulating a research question addressing that gap. And that sounds pretty sensible. It's certainly how I always used to do things when I wrote my research instead of made films. But I'm not sure that's what I do anymore. I don't think I and many of the people in our issues are identifying their research questions at such an early stage. We might be doing something a lot more vague. We might just be picking a subject. Or in my case, because I do videographic criticism, effectively remixing films and TV shows in order to make arguments about them of some kind, I may not know anything more than the film or TV show I'm going to put into my video editor and start remixing with before I do things. So this is quite shocking for somebody who did train here as a traditional scholar, one using writing. You kind of had to throw out the way you've always worked and embrace unknowing, this space of unknowing that Alan referred to in Ella Wright's video for our issue. So academic filmmaking doesn't always begin with that. Active due diligence happening always before we begin. But what I would argue, and what our issue argues, and why I would argue all of those people wrote such long statements, is that it has to happen at some stage. And so these kind of multimodal conglomerates or assemblages, a word I'll come back to later, of different methods that seem to go towards construing academic filmmaking as a medium of research, if you like, or a mode of research, does involve that process. Now, whether that means you've got lots of bibliography at the end of your video essay, or you have actual kind of active verbal content to discuss things, you know, there are millions, well, there's many different approaches to this, if you like, as there are video essays at the moment, or films in academia. But it's an exciting field, as Alan and Libby also tried to suggest. Sometimes, you know, well, one of the contributors to the first issue, 27, Pinar Fontini, who discusses her PhD research made in the pandemic, you remember the quotation about that, she talks about the fundamental unpredictability of filmmaking research. And also, as Sebastian Wiedmann and Veronica Naranjo Quintero argue, thought may come in action rather than in reflection and evaluation. I'm going to read a quotation from them. Sorry, I didn't put it on my slide. One might wonder if we have formulated the problem correctly when speaking of academic filmmaking, as if the problem were the defense of a particular typology anchored and adjectivized in the academic, which circulates in the space of the university. However, since what we ought to be circulating in the university does not always, in fact, circulate, we have tried to invoke the fecundity and fertility of new thoughts. Cinema, and by this they mean filmmaking in general, has been called upon to integrate itself timidly and gradually into this academic ethos, to revitalize what should always have been germinating. That is, the sparkling force of thought in action, the adventure of an all-alive thought as a generative and creative potency, and not as an argumentative and analytical exegesis that ultimately stops the movement of thought. And yet when they write that and they make their films, they are also aware of the filmmaking that has gone before. They are also aware of the scholarship on the subject area that has gone before. But it doesn't, if you like, bog them down. So what the issues, I think, argue, if you like, they perform as an act, is the argument that new knowledge in academic filmmaking happens on at least 3 levels. In its methods, which are often non-traditional, they're often challenging to scholarly methods, as many of us who weren't trained as filmmakers to start with have learned them. They're also challenging in terms of their content, and I'll come back to this notion of content next. And they're also, obviously, perhaps least surprisingly, challenging in their form. They are challenging. The audiovisuality of this challenges making, doing, and knowing. So what the issues, I think, all argue, what in terms of like the individual contributions, that the new knowledge that they contribute are happening at these levels, and I'm going to kind of take them quickly one by one. Content, which I mentioned before, thinking, performativity, and distribution. And distribution means quite a lot of things as my conclusive idea. So content for me is obviously, in a written text would be the words, but we would also say that the content of a written text would be its arguments. It would be its account, its analysis, its arguments, and its conclusions. Those would be the traditional kind of things we need to cover in a humanities essay, for example. And I remember learning that breakdown in this building with Ronaldo Cueto of the Spanish department many, many years ago. But obviously in terms of filmmaking, it's not a monomedia form. It isn't just writing. Verbal content may well play a part in films. Obviously people speak, there are captions, but words are just one component, and they may not even really be there as well. So in this multimodal content, we're talking about everything is different. And so the content, the knowledge content, also needs to be thought of differently. One of the things that those of us who take to videographic criticism find is that by working on the films or the TV shows themselves, we are making content discoveries that we would not have made if we'd simply been watching these films, for example, in the cinema or on our TV screen, or even on our DVD player or Blu-ray player, repeatedly watching a scene. As soon as we import that, we digitize or convert that material and import it into our video editing software, it looks different. It's represented differently to us. It has an event viewer, which turns everything into thumbnails. I can see thumbnails from the entire film in one screen, which will show patterns to me, perhaps colors, juxtapositions. If I've got two films in there, I can spot things that I would never have spotted. This is the optical unconscious that Walter Benjamin wrote about when he said that technology allows us to see things differently, not just in the ways that the human eye either can or is accustomed to doing. So formal parameters can lead to content discoveries. And so that's a new form of knowledge that emerges from this work. We're not just talking about new facts, new arguments, new verbal or quantitative evidence or understanding, but we are also talking about all of those different kinds of new knowledge. As Eile Matakov writes, in her piece, she writes, academic filmmaking allows scholars to act as agents of change and to create visible evidence of social and political issues that need addressing. Libby's film, which I haven't yet seen, but look forward to seeing very soon, 1922, recreates or creates resources that didn't exist before. It's like a curatorial function of new knowledge that we see in filmmaking. We have stagings of things, showings of pages from documents, in movement. These are all very, very different ways of providing visible or audible evidence than you would get in a reflective written piece or a historical account in writing, for example. But I would also argue that not only do we see new things, but we have new experiences with them. So in a way, what we see in the finished film may also generate new knowledge in its audience. We're offering new experiences, a way of seeing things or hearing things that has not existed before. And in itself, that can be new knowledge, as numerous examples of works in our issue show. Okay, I'm going to kind of cut a little bit there. So on to thinking. One of the things that we published in this issue is Ben Spatz's great piece on his summative reflections, their summative reflections on their work as an academic filmmaker and also as an academic editor who founded a journal, the Journal of Embodied Thinking. But also they refer to the concept that they introduced into our field, which is the video way of thinking. Now, the video way of thinking is this, again, kind of optical unconscious related idea that, by all of the different stages of filmmaking, which in Ben's work involves live action filmmaking, performers working in front of a camera, people working behind a camera, people editing the footage and then publishing it in an academic journal. This is a very different kind of thinking than in conventional academic written research. In my own work, I've referred to the understanding of the Australian sculptor Barbara Bolt, who introduced, for me at least, the idea of material thinking, this notion of working with the actual material that you're studying enables new forms of thinking. Sorry, I'm going to have to, thank you, that's great. And this idea of thinking also can be seen on a kind of broader level, as I think it's Laura Davila Argotti and Valentina Giraldo Sanchez write in the issue, one of the issues, cinema becomes a relational tool that fluctuates between the one who films and the one who is filmed. It embodies a living practice, constantly evolving and transforming. To move on to the next kind of area of new knowledge, and that's performativity. And again, this is something that I have written about along with other scholars. Many people in creative practice research have written about how practice research is often performative. Brad Haseman is the person who kind of, in a way, coined this notion of the creative practice research as performative. So not only do people perform in it, perhaps creatively, but the videos or the works themselves are performative in terms of the knowledge that they produce. And this is seen, I think, really well in our issue in one of my favorite pieces, which was in Alan's reel teaser trailer, and that's Ariel Avisar, who you saw sitting in front of a computer getting frustrated and eating bananas. And what we're seeing him in the rest of the video doing, and which also some of the video also discusses with other academics, including Alan and myself, what he is doing. What he's actually doing is trying to stage an experiment using kind of a video screen full of different videos that he's trying to kind of connect up. I don't want to spoil it for you, so I'm being very vague. And it's a very frustrating experiment. And the whole video is a performance of his, well, like, does he succeed in this experiment? It's like performing a scientific experiment creatively in front of our eyes in real time over many, 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 many hours, requiring bananas as support. And so that is a piece of performative research. Well, what new knowledge does it find? Well, it comes up with an awful lot of interesting arguments and ideas in the dialogue that Ariel stages between himself and all of the academics he interviews at the end. Well, he doesn't really interview us, he makes us play games with him. So this kind of performativity carries through right until the end of the video. But does it tell us anything about the video experiment? Again, I don't want to spoil it, but I might suggest perhaps that's not its major value. Instead, it's about ludic methods, the performance of games, using games as a scientific method, if you like. So totally performative work. And another video in the same sort of vein is, again, was shown to you, Samantha Close's work, where you saw the computer desktop being manipulated in various ways. And this is a specific form of the video essay called the desktop documentary, pretty much inaugurated by Kevin B. Lee, one of the contributors to the issue, although he's not writing about that this time. But where we see the interface of the computer desktop as the material that we think with. It's that's edited, and we see a sort of research process take place. But in Samantha Close's work, which I think is probably in the kind of field of game studies, as well as videographic criticism, we're seeing a game played with desktop documentary, again, a game performed. So knowledge may not be just a summary of findings of those experiments, but the experience that the videos offer you of the experiments and what was at stake in them. And of course, this is a very engaging and affecting modality, unlike a scientific write-up of the results of an experiment. And then finally, and perhaps most complexly, but I'll try and be brief, we have distribution. We've already kind of heard, I think, especially in Libby's reference to the piece she contributed to with Andres Davila and, where the three academics based at the Universidad de las Artes in Ecuador reflected on three filmmaking experiences that they had whilst working as researchers and teachers in this university at a kind of historically difficult moment, really, over a period that was very difficult, I think. And so in a way, one of the things that piece shows us was not just that three pieces of filmmaking are produced that each make distinct contributions to knowledge, but the experiences, especially when shared amongst the three of them and then relayed to us, also created new knowledge about what filmmaking does in those kinds of contexts, in those academic work contexts. Libby said that these were films that would never have been produced commercially. And we see that time and time again with academic filmmaking. I can think of a number of examples of academic filmmaking that were commercial successes, and the biggest one was Clio Barnard's film, The Arbor, which if you've never seen it, really must find that film. It both was a success commercially, it was funded within the sort of British independent film industry structures, but was also an academic work that was entered for a research excellence framework exercise and audited as a piece of genuine academic work along with all of the reflections on it. But most works are not like that. So what they then perform is an experiment or an exploration of how we make what filmmaking is. Especially, you know, in a way in opposition to the kind of conventional structures. They also allow works to come into being that challenge those structures and that argue for the space of academic filmmaking. In the context of the issues, I think the pieces that discuss this question of distribution or making the platforms in which this work is being produced, which might include academic institutions, are Drew Morton and Kevin Ferguson, who discussed the first 10 years of the journal that Alan, myself, and Libby have all been involved in over the 10 years in different ways. But now Alan as an editor and Libby as a continuing associate editor. And the kind of like how to run a journal on no money. What does that really mean? It means a lot in terms of the labor of the editors, but it means even more in terms of those things about how academic filmmaking can actually find a place. Because if it's constantly precarious and might disappear at any second and depends on all of its contributors' own Vimeo accounts that may or may not sort of be subscribed to year after year forever, you know, you can see that those, again, are kind of performative experiments in the viability of video as a publishing medium, for example. Susan Kerrigan, Bettina Frankham, and James Verdon also discussed that Australian institutional context of filmmaking and publishing about filmmaking in the journal Sightlines. Elim Atikav's piece very much explores the institutional context of her award-winning work at the University of East Anglia and beyond. And Jessica Jacobs, who is the geographer in the issue, again, raises the question, one of Alan's quotations pointed this out, about how can geographical film come into being if we don't have anywhere we can see it? You know, this is a kind of an important question. Obviously, you could put things on YouTube, but how would geographers know where to go? So things might be formally published with peer review, or they may appear on other platforms that can be generated by academics. And then, yes, I already mentioned Ben Spatz's work and their running of the Journal of Embodied Research, and their discussion of that work in these issues reveal that kind of work to be disruptive on a huge number of aspects. But there's one other way in which I think distribution is raised by this. And it's coming from the understanding, and I mean, people know this, I think, but it's becoming more discussed, I think, in relation to creative practice. And that's the work of Jacques Rancière, the French writer who's written a lot about cinema. And he has had this phrase called the distribution of the sensible. And this is a quotation from his book, Politics of Aesthetics. Occasionally translated as the partition of the sensible, distribution of the sensible, le partage du sensible, refers to the implicit law governing the sensible order that parcels out places and forms of participation in a common world by first establishing the modes of perception within which these are inscribed. The distribution of the sensible thus produces a system of self-evident facts of perception based on the set horizons of modalities of what is visible and audible, as well as what can be said, thought, made, or done. Strictly speaking, distribution, therefore, refers both to forms of inclusion and forms of exclusion. The sensible, of course, does not refer to what shows good sense or judgment, but to what is capable of being apprehended by the senses. And in the issue, two of the contributors raised this, and I have to say I'm very grateful to them because it hadn't been something I had thought about in relation to academic filmmaking. So in terms of the new knowledge that our issues contribute, for me, some of the most important components come from the way that this understanding is used. And the person who spends most time discussing it is Lizzie Thin in her work on the filmmaking of the Finnish filmmaker Susanna Helka, and how her work of documentary and feminist witnessing provoke acts of rupture in this distribution of the sensible. And she makes a very complex argument that I can't reduce. So I really highly recommend that you read it. And the other person who refers to distribution of the sensible is Pinar Fontini and her kind of documentary modality as well. But I think it's something that all of us can be thinking about, because it seems to me that is very clear from the contributions to the issue, particularly Libby's and her colleagues making films in Ecuador, but to Ben Spatz's work, to Barbara Zecchi's work. She uses Deleuze rather than Rancière and the notion of minoritarian cinema. A lot of this work is disruptive, not just simply because academia doesn't do this, but also disruptive in what you might call more significant ways, to come back to that word I used at the beginning. In other words, decolonial, anti-colonial, kind of promoting criticality about gender, promoting criticality about ideology in a very, very big number of ways, not simply in terms of arguments, but also in terms of forms. And I'll finish by a phrase I think that comes up in Johannes Binotto's work, which all of us have referred to. We hold it very dearly to our hearts, which comes from some work that he did with Evelyn Kreutzer, where they produced a manifesto of videographic vulnerability. Because the other way in which this work is disruptive, the other way in which this work reconfigures the distribution of the sensible, is that it puts the senses and the feelings and emotions out there in ways that we haven't seen in academia. But that does have a cost. But it also kind of underlines the importance of dealing with this issue of how we can produce, using these modalities, established knowledge. In other words, how can we produce structures that allow us to create a body of work that people can go and look at and understand that this is the scholarship in filmmaking form that came before. So I'll leave you there, and I'm sorry I went on a little bit long there. Thank you very much.
What a wonderful set of presentations. Thank you so much for that. I mean, it's a really rich, there's a couple of editions. I have read it all, but it was really great to hear your kind of like, you know, your curation of it, which I thought was absolutely fascinating. So I've got one observation. I've got two observations, but I'll only say one in case I talk too much, and I do tend to talk too much. But one of the things I think is really fascinating about, you know, a lot of what we were talking about here is definitions, wasn't it? About kind of, you started right at the beginning, Libby, with, you know, the difference between the film essay and the video essay, and or the essay film and the video essay, and you know, and that fascinates me, how these definitions help to shape the engagement. And one of the things that I really enjoy about academic filmmaking versus other forms of filmmaking is the fact that you're engaging in an academic context that has a structure, yeah, and that structure, for better or worse. But what's really good about that structure is you get feedback, yeah. So I understand all the issues that are at play here, but what's really good about being involved in your collection, another collection of involved, is the fact that people look at the film, they give you detailed feedback, they engage with what you said. It might be difficult to hear sometimes, but normally when you make films, you just don't get that. And that's one of the things I think about that's very interesting about the academic filmmaking experience, is that you are engaging in an academic structure that does have a kind of allow you a creative potential that you don't actually get in more ostensibly normal creative spheres. Like, you know, so you make a film, you stick it, send it off to a film festival. It either gets accepted, it might win a prize, or it might not. But what you normally get then is a standard letter saying, "Oh, we really loved your film, it's absolutely amazing, but we're not going to show it." Yeah, and that's it. And then if you try to engage with them, they say, "We've been inundated with submissions, and we know people are." But what's really great about the process of engaging with you guys is that you didn't say that. You told us this is what we want to do, you know, and that can be, you know, that can be difficult. But what's really good is that there is a structure around academia where people feel that they can take a position on something and they understand what that position is in a way that, in sort of like the broader filmmaking process, if you like, people don't really feel that they've got a position that they can do that. So I don't know whether, I mean, that's not really a question, it's just really an observation that actually one of the ways that you can define academic criticism, academic filmmaking, is that there is a structure that you can game with that has real creative potential.
Yeah, completely. I agree completely with what you're saying. And I have the experience also of recently going through a process like that, because I submitted a video essay to In Transition, the journal, and I had this feedback from one of the peer reviewers whose name is Sadia Shepherd, and she and I, it turned into this conversation about the work, and it really influenced a lot the final product. I mean, the video essay changed a lot because of our conversation and the feedback she gave me, the questions that she had, the way that she was understanding the work, and it really, she really did, through her comments, like, and through this engagement, it really made me think and push myself even more with the video essay to really explore parts of it that I hadn't even considered at the beginning. So it was entirely part of the creative process, and it wouldn't have been possible in another way.
Do you believe that the video essay or the academic film has a lot more reach, especially among younger people in the modern age? Because as the internet is moving more so to a visual stage rather than a text-based stage, to get younger people engaged with academics and especially film academics, do you think releasing them publicly outside of journals would help getting people interested in this kind of world?
Yeah, as the oldest person on the panel, I definitely think that's true. You know, we kind of underplayed in a way the reason why our issue happened and why we've got this body of work to talk about and the future of which we can worry about is because of the digital turn. And it's because of the kind of coming into being of those platforms that are now absolutely central to many people's lives, especially anybody under 50, you know, YouTube, Vimeo, obviously in 2005, 2006, and obviously TikTok and platforms yet to be invented. You know, that it's because suddenly people started sharing work. People who weren't academics started putting, if you like, amateur, by which I do not mean poor, I just mean unpaid, forms of scholarship of their own online. That's what Rancière is talking about when he's talking about the disruption, the redistribution of the sensible. More voices get to be heard, and they kind of disrupt the kind of established structures of communications. And so, of course, a lot of the work that gets produced, even in academia, when that suddenly starts happening towards like 2008, 2009, you know, I've been doing it since then, for example, you know, paid attention to what was happening online because we wanted people to watch our work. We didn't have academic journals we could publish it in. My little video remixes back in 2008, we had to make them. But in the meantime, we wanted our work to be seen. We wanted to be like making work that was inspired by the work that we were seeing. That was often by young people. I was a bit younger myself then as well. So, but yeah, absolutely. I think what then becomes interesting is how those disruptions continue. So we get settled on a platform, Vimeo, for example, it's where all of the academic filmmakers went with their accounts. And now we have TikTok. But TikTok is a completely different platform with completely different forms. What are we going to do? It's not happening very quickly there, but it's going to, it's got to. We have to be on those platforms, and those platforms have to inform what we do. That's one of the reasons why desktop documentary has been such an important practice, because it's kind of in a way like shown the context of the emergence of these forms of filmmaking that are so popular. That said, you know, I think what would a popular academic filmmaking project be? Well, apart from the Arbor, and what was the one made? The one, I'm kind of blanking on the title here, but Alan can help me out. He mentions it. Acts of Killing is the one that's in, we talk about in the introduction to the issue. Joshua Oppenheimer. You know, apart from those pieces which have been seen by many, many people, maybe now Laura Mulvey's Riddles of the Sphinx, available on different like Blu-rays and platforms across the world. You know, most of our films are not seen by a lot of people. Now, that doesn't matter. Most of our articles weren't read by a lot of people either. But on the other hand, it does kind of, in a way, raise some of these questions about our relation to the popular and the mass as things that we study.
Yeah, I would just add also, maybe that is the most disruptive thing about it, that young people can do it, you know. Yes.
I agree with Catherine with her argument that we need to discuss who have the authority to validate what new knowledge means. Like, what's the difference between filmmaking and doing the actual research? Like, for example, I've always believed that filmmaking and film editing is some sort of mediated cognition where we can externalize our thoughts and make them visible to others. So in case of doing a new film, it's similar to like doing a new experiment where we can control all the variables, but still there are unexpected things that might happen and we need to improvise. But what if we are curating documentaries, for example, as you mentioned, that I might start without having a research question, but I consider it like coding, where I need to do like some sort of computational thinking. I start by putting all the materials on the timeline and then add some like labels, categorize these materials, and then I will start to see those patterns, then test the timeline and recreate this again. So what's the difference between this and the research, you know?
You were talking about seeing, were you making an analogy, I think, but possibly based on the actual subject matter that you were working with, between filmmaking as processing, a kind of form of processual thinking that could be like a scientific experiment of putting, you were talking about coding though a little bit. So were you actually talking about that as a subject matter or as a procedure? Yeah, as a way of thinking. And the way, one of the things I didn't say much about, although I said too much about other things, Alan, was about your notion of the parameter. And I'm not sure if that can connect up here.
Thank you to the questioner, and thanks, Katie, for summarizing as well. Just I lost some of the question while you were speaking. Perhaps I won't talk about the parametric stuff because it would be too involved, but I will say that following on from what Katie said and what the questioner suggested, the whole notion of the research question has become far too privileged within our ambit practice. I think the research question has become the ideology of our time, basically, the notion of the research question. And it's a sort of utilitarian concept of what academic work ought to be, where it has to achieve extractable results, and perhaps also I might mention impact here, which is, of course, an admirable thing, but not necessarily something that has to be achieved in predefined ways. But I think one of the virtues of this practice is that it can precisely, or let's say filmmaking as a mode of, a processual mode of thought or of thinking, is that it can refuse the ideology and I would say even the tyranny of the research question. I mean, this is not a new point. This is exactly the kind of thing that has been said about creative research and practice research for a long time, that the research question might be discovered. But I have to say, from my own point of view, I want to keep that discovery of the research question postponed as long as possible, and perhaps indefinitely. This makes my work unfundable, but it also makes it exciting to do. Katie and Libby, we might perhaps, if we have time, I'm not sure what you guys want to do because I know you have another event soon. But if we have time, we could perhaps read a couple of the comments from the chat.
Yes, let's do that.
So we had several. There's far too many to actually read through, but I guess one comment generated a long discussion in the chat. It was from N. Shepherd. I think that might be Nick Shepherd. I don't know if N. Shepherd is still here, but I'll read the comment in any case. This person suggests that it's interesting that the text accompanying the film, so this is the guiding text in the second special issue where we had the video essays, was often quite wordy, so lengthy. It's been suggested that we lose some meaning when non-text knowledge forms, for example, in oral history, are conveyed in writing. I would have thought that some filmmakers would prefer not to apply text to their films, but I'm not a filmmaker, yet. I would say immediately that, of course, in anthropological or ethnographic film, there often is a very strong resistance to putting text on screen as in directional ways for the material. But even those anthropologists who work in that way will tend to publish material that in some way accompanies the work. But I'll hand over to Libby and Katie and perhaps to the room to talk about that. As I say, there's quite a discussion in the chat about this issue.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things we haven't said about writing and its role in accompanying, supplementing, explaining, summarizing, choose any of those verbs, filmmaking work, is something to do with what I was making the point about in terms of academic context. Because at the moment, we're not very far from it. We all know this, that we now know that AI transcriptions of verbal content delivered orally in filmmaking can now be summarized in captions, automated captions, to a very high degree of accuracy. So we are not at all far from the ability of artificial intelligence systems to search standalone videos, let's put it that way, and be able to extract verbal content. And of course, we may see that, and I certainly on the whole do, as pretty insidious. I mean, one of the things that's been subversive about filmmaking is precisely that it hasn't been able to be summarized in writing and therefore shut down as a result always. But one of the things we have to consider in academic publishing is searchability. And so one of the roles of writing in this field in terms of publication has been to provide a searchable component, to provide an indexical component in terms of academic indices. And I know that's why the journal, we were very happily working with Academic Quarter that offered us this space that's so precious and valuable, as well as resources like copy editing and so on. One of the reasons they were making particular word length demands about the statements was because of that, because this is the system that they're working with, is trying to produce something that can be searched, that can be seen as part of the body of knowledge, that visibilizes the filmmaking in some important way. But these things are changing so fast now. So it could be that there won't even be that justification for the written statement, that there'll be some other way of alt text that rather like the Journal of Embodied Thinking, I think, the kind of appendices sort of version of the writing that we're going to be working with in future. But as we always saw it in transition, the named peer reviewer statements are a form of co-authorship. They help to activate the filmmaking as scholarship in ways that is often not seen by the filmmakers themselves. The filmmakers themselves may understand a range of ways in which the film produces new knowledge. The peer reviewers will produce a range of other ways in which it's viewed as peer-reviewed knowledge. Now, they could produce those peer reviews in video form. That has happened once, although it never got published because it was for a video that wasn't eventually published. But yes, what about audiovisual peer review? Well, if we thought it was going to be hard to find peer reviewers to do written statements, I think it might be quite hard to get them to do videos, but maybe not. Okay.
Well, I think that there have been many video essays that have also been made in response to video essays. That's something that I've been seeing a lot recently. I don't know, that kind of response. It's not through a journal, maybe, but it might be one day, right?
No, I mean, in a way, in order to achieve the kind of like what I was positing as the specificity of the academic context, we need that to happen as well. We need, and Alan has been talking about this lately in very interesting ways with Evelyn Kreutzer in a very recent edition of the Video Essay podcast, which is one of the best contexts for discussion of our medium of videographic criticism. Alan, you were engaging in a talk with Evelyn, which covered that and looked at this question of citationality, which was the word that I raised and then didn't go back to in my presentation. I don't know if we want to say a bit more about that.
Well, I think we should probably read some more comments rather than hearing from me more.
Sure.
Liz, first of all, I want to make a correction. The comment that I read out was from Nan Shepherd, not Nick Shepherd. So apologies, Nan, for getting that wrong. Lizzie Thin, one of our contributors, has in the chat makes a comment about the long-standing issue facing practice-led research, and thus also at least some academic filmmaking, is the idea that it should produce findings that are generalizable as knowledge. and each work's status as a specific performative act. Obviously, this is in response to your talk, Katie. So I don't know if you want to respond to that in any way.
Not really. I think I said quite a lot, but I would just say that one of the things that Lizzie has been, as somebody who's been one of the founders of filmmaking practice research in the UK, especially since she's been based at the University of Sussex, is that the minimum statement that we have to do to summarize our objects, our filmmaking objects in the government-led audit in the UK for research is 300 words. And I've always felt that was one of its kind of most amazing aspects, really, that it didn't really require us to do it in very many words. It trusted the peer reviewers of that audit to come to judgments that didn't simply rely on those 300 words. Lizzie there. Is there any way we can get Lizzie to speak? No. Hi, Lizzie.
Well, I haven't got anything more to add, but yes, thank you. Yes, this is a really interesting discussion. Yeah, I think because you touched on the question of knowledge, and of course that is a thorny issue about what constitutes knowledge, and it goes on and on. But I think what you talked about very well is the whole question of sort of non-intellectual knowledge, non-cognitive knowledge, forms of knowledge that, of course, practice-based work can most deal with, but which is most difficult to articulate in 300 words, certainly.
Thank you.
So we have a long comment from Ben. So Ben, I wonder, this is not the clarification, but rather the one that begins another thought from me, what has really stood out and so on. Would you like to read it yourself, Ben?
Sure, yeah. So I said what has really stood out for me in recent years, not just about video, but definitely also about academic video making, is the ongoing power and mattering of disciplinarity. And we were talking about geography, which of course intersects with disciplinarity. I really appreciate this idea of academic filmmaking because it's such a broad tent. And different disciplines have such radically different understandings about what this can mean. So I mean, I'm thinking about the event, of course, that I organized with Alan and Johannes, which was kind of primarily framed as like videographic film criticism with performing arts video. And then, you know, another one might be videographic film criticism with anthropology. And now I'm organizing one in May at Oxford, but it's kind of like anthropology with contemporary video art. And, you know, all of those they're such different conversations. And that's because you bring two disciplines together. Because I think, I mean, actually, I think I want to connect it to what Joel wrote below, which is it's about the central role of digital technology. I'm skipping to Joel's comment, where, you know, I'm starting to see videographic scholarship as simply the expression of academia in basically a digitally flooded environment. And this, you know, thinking about the social media platforms, and the kind of, I mean, we have this flood, this intensity of the social media platforms, the platformization, and, you know, I'm not even going to speak about what's happening in the US, but that power of the technology is so intense. So I guess thinking about the power of disciplinarity, like this is what we have. And these different disciplines have radically different things to say about key issues like knowledge, creativity, practice, embodiment, emplacement, and especially politics. And I guess, you know, when I was writing this comment, I was thinking more from the perspective of like that they're so different from each other, but I'm also thinking about all of these fields are under attack now. And so it's also a question of like, these are huge resources, particularly in distinction from that kind of social media platformization, digital world that is kind of this massive juggernaut. And it's like we actually have these quite established disciplinary conversations. We have to retain those, you know, on their own and in conversation with each other.
Yeah, I just Thank you. I think that was a wonderful comment, Ben, and it was very much because I guess when we were editing this, which was really in the middle of last year, particularly, things were looking bad, but they were not quite where we're at right now. And also another thing that's happened, as well as all of the things that are happening right now, that hasn't perhaps received enough kind of publicity is what's happening to the Internet Archive. For many of us, the Internet Archive was the one repository out there that we could upload our videos to that wasn't proprietary and commercial. And the attacks that it's been undergoing for a number of reasons, not specifically for the video material it holds there, have meant that that is a platform that may not exist. It could just tomorrow not exist, and it would not be brought back. The Wayback Machine obviously is a hugely important resource right now, but the video content that it stores is also. And if that goes and YouTube and Vimeo start getting instructed even more directly not to publish alternative work, let's put it that way, then the academic platforms like In Transition, like the Journal of Embodied Thinking, both at Open Library of Humanities, become even more important. And yet those platforms are also vulnerable in lots of different ways. Can we find a way of storing this work for future citationality, for future memory, that can be safe? Now, obviously, like bricks and mortar libraries are not necessarily safe, but they are obviously a lot safer. And samizdat circulation can happen very easily with texts. It did happen at the beginning of the internet with video as well, but not in ways that could really create a viable system of communication. So those are the things that I'm worried about today. But I do think our issue, thanks to our marvelous contributors, makes a real contribution to what is at stake, what can be done with this material. But now we have to move on to find ways of really sustaining it against what is happening right now.
Perhaps this is the moment to jump in with a comment from Adrian Martin. Perhaps, Adrian, would you like to read this yourself? I will read it for you. Well, I'll start and Adrian can jump in if he prefers. A general question for the speakers, but it links to what Katie has just been talking about. I think one of the great unspoken issues in academic filmmaking is funding, all caps, to exclamation marks. For instance, some filmmakers now become academics because the university is the only place where they can get even a modicum of money to do their creative work. And he puts as a PS that I speak as part of a duo, who we all know, of course, that makes videographic work on no funding whatsoever and makes extremely fine work on a very regular basis. I mean, I guess I would say that we are extremely fortunate within the Academy to be supported in doing this work just by our salaries. Some people have been successful, like Johannes, who's one of our contributors and attending here with Evelyn Kreutzer and Kevin B. Lee and other people like Richard Mizek at getting funding from the state or the research funding bodies of their respective jurisdictions. But for most of us, it's been quite hard, but we continue as salaried academics to be able to make it as part of our normal research activity. And that is obviously an enormous privilege. It also allows us, I think, to be experimental in what we do, because it doesn't require a big audience as well as a big budget necessarily, but we don't have to get it, we don't have to monetize the work on YouTube, or we don't have to get it seen at film festivals, for example. It can be published and seen by relatively few people, but it's kind of part of a scholarly exchange in quite a traditional way, if you like.
But it's also true that this, particularly the videographic criticism that Adrian practices with Cristina Alvarez Lopez in their marvelous duo, but also that I did, came about because we were outside of academia. It wouldn't have happened if we'd been inside it either, because of the way that, because of the instrumentalization of forms of research in the academy. So it's a kind of like interesting, complex situation, I think. But I do remember that it was the entry of people from the artistic communities, from art schools as well, into the academy that created a moment of disruption that led to the structures being implemented for creative practice research being kind of validated. So we do owe artists a huge debt of gratitude to that, as well as we owe independent artists like Adrian and Christina a debt of gratitude for continuing to do work both for freelance pay, but also for experimental purposes that contribute so much to our disciplines.
I think Johannes also writes about cross-funding. I don't know if he wanted to say something.
Not really, just, yeah, I was just like echoing, yeah, that this kind of like, this truly is like the big issue. And I find it perhaps like just like something interesting to consider, something that I realized because I was just like recently in conversation with an artist who was like thinking about like, yeah, finding funding for an artistic project. And I was also recommending to that artist to perhaps like also frame it also in a context of scientific research, because strangely enough, like universities are interested in having like artistic practices included, whereas kind of like it's getting more and more difficult for like proper artists to find their funding. So it's kind of, it's really, yeah, world has turned upside down.
We also like your scarf, Johannes.
I think we're probably, I just want to make a quick announcement before you guys might need to bring it to a halt, because I know you've got Katie's other event. Just to say, before the conversation continues, that we hope to make the recording of this event available, and the contents of the chat we'll also make available, because some of the discussion there is quite rich. So we'll make sure that people can get that. I see we've got a comment there from Stephanie Schwander-Sievers, who is one of our contributors in a joint piece with Paul Cooke. Stephanie, would you like to read that yourself, or we can read it for you?
Probably, I understand we don't have time to discuss it, but I was just so reminded of what we were trying to do by discussing participatory film and the originally intended message, and does the message get across? And we used sort of an experimental theoretical debate around the different approaches to ontology, the ontology of the picture, the image by Bazin versus the anthropological ontological turn, and just listening to the debate, I thought there's also a different ontology to text versus film, right? And it so depends on what audience we are catering for and want to talk to and engage with, or maybe not. I'm not sure. I'm just thinking. I found this all very inspiring and great food for thought. So looking forward to delving into more contributions of our colleagues who've also published in this special issue. So just thank you very much for the wonderful debate and presentations.
Thank you to Stephanie, and thank you Lizzie and Johannes and Ben and all the contributors who are connected through Zoom and have spoken. It's wonderful to see you, to be in this community, which is now a hybrid community almost always, right? And yeah, it's great that you could join us and share your experience of also writing these articles and doing all your great work.
Well, thank you very much for this event, which was very enjoyable and stimulating, and also to the editors for all their hard work on the issue. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Well, I think that's will end our event, but we invite you to continue to room LG16 for the following event with Catherine Grant and Melanie Bell. We will watch their new video essay, so it's very exciting. And thank you so much to everyone online, connected online. We hope you can also see the video essay soon.
Yes, the video essay is going to be played, shown a few times on bigger screens, but will soon be available in published form. So, thank you. I think I think there's a 15-minute break between this and I think I'm not.